Hello, this is Bunton with a Visual Functional Mathematics, Level 1, Section 1 on numbers. Today is Lesson 2, in which we'll deal with adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. In this lesson, you will know when to add or subtract, how to add without a calculator, know how to subtract without a calculator, when and how to multiply, how to divide without a calculator, how to give answers in whole numbers, and you will also know how to check that your calculations are correct. In maths, as I've always told you in the past, for those of you who are first attending my lesson, you need to know that keywords and phrases are very important, and are always identify the new words or words you're familiar with but really have not thought about their meanings. In this case, your words are add, which means to increase, subtract, meaning to reduce, multiply or times, which is a shortened way of adding the same number x number of times, divide, which is to share equally, and check, that is the way to check that your calculations are correct. Let's look at adding and subtracting. And in this case, you need to know when to add or subtract. In real life, you will not be told what calculation to do. You have to figure it out. And this is why you need to be able to understand the problem you're faced with. In an exam, you will be expected to know these things, but in practice, always get your pen and your notebook ready to do some small calculations and to make notes of important words. So, in real life problems, you will not always be told when to add or subtract. You will be expected to work out whether to add or subtract. One other thing I want to bring to your attention is you have to read carefully. I am explaining as we go along, but you will be on your own, and I will not be there to answer your questions. So you listen to what I'm saying now, or what I'm saying on the video, and then read for yourself what is on the screen. Try to understand it, and then you go ahead with the challenge. Let's look at an example now of a real life problem. A rugby team wins a match. They scored 25 points from tries, 8 points from conversions, and 12 points from kicks. The opponent scored 32 points in total. How many points did the team win by? It's always useful to keep statistics. I'm a football fan. I'm not going to tell you what team I support. I don't want to lose your patronage. But I'm a very keen football fan, and I always watch all the statistics, especially for my favorite player, Bukayo Saka. Okay, answer to the example. This calculation has two steps. First, you add up the total number of points the team scored, which is 25 plus 8 plus 12, which is 45. Then you want to know by how much they won. So you have to subtract the other team's total, which is 32, from 45, and your answer will be 13. Remember to write your answer out clearly. The rugby team won by 13 points. Now, how to add without using a calculator? This is very, very important. You will not always have a calculator at hand, but if you know how to do mental calculations, then you'll be fine. In an exam, you'll have a piece of paper to write on, but in real life, maybe you're in a shop, you will not have your calculator with you, and also you might not even have pen and paper to write with, so it's always useful to be able to do mental calculations. 3 steps you should follow. That is when you have all your equipment. Write the numbers with one above the other, lining up the units columns. Add up the columns from right to left. Write the sum at the bottom of each column. And then you apply the rules of adding in maths, which is step 3. If the digits add up to more than 9, write the units digit at the bottom of the column and carry the 1 to the next column. Write a little 1 at the top of the next column so that you'll be able to include that when you do your calculations. This has to be extended until the end of the calculations. In other words, all the units, all the columns have been added. Here is an example. I would advise you not to be daunted by the amount of text you see on the screen. All you need to do is just read diligently and carefully from top to bottom. The example says, visitors arrive at the theme park by car or by coach. One day, 8,340 people arrived by coach and 2,378 arrived in cars. How many people visited the theme park in total that day? And below are the methods. You see 4 stages. Each stage tells you what to do with each column. So you write out the numbers one above the other, lining up the units. That is important. Tens under tens, units under units, and so on. And then add up each columns in turn, starting with the units column. You'll see that on the calculation there are the 4 steps. Each stage has some notes at the bottom. Read it carefully and you will understand what I'm trying to say. Also read that note in red, which explains how to deal with the 1,000 column calculations. Right, so naught plus 1 is 8. You put your 8 down and step 2. And then 4 plus 7 is 11. You cannot write 11 yet, so you put 1 and you carry the 110 over to the other column. 3 plus 3 is 6, plus that 1 you carried over, making 7. And then 8 plus 2 is 10, because you didn't carry anything over to the 1,000 column, so that is your answer, which is the total number of visitors is 10,718. Now let's look how to subtract without using a calculator. Write the numbers with a bigger 1 on top, line up the units column, and then step 2, start with the units column. Take the bottom digit away from the top digit. And then in step 3, if the top digit is smaller than the bottom digit, you need to borrow 10 from the next column along. Subtract 1 from the column to the left and add 10 to the column you are subtracting. Remember, the value of what you borrowed from the tens column is 10 yearly. Likewise, if you borrow from the hundreds column to do your calculation on the tens column, that one you borrowed is 10, because 10 times 10 is 100, and so on. Now, do the same for each column in turn from right to left. Let's look at the example. Again, don't be put off by the amount of reading you have to do. You have to just be patient and be diligent about it. Jess buys a house for £97,950. She pays a deposit of £18,500. How much does she have still to pay? On the first step, you arrange your figures. You subtract 18,500 from 97,950. You start with your units column. Naught minus naught is naught, so you go on to the next one. 5 minus naught is 5. No problem. Go to the next one. 9 minus 5 is 4. No problem. Go on to the next one. 7 minus 8, problem. You cannot. So what you need to do is you borrow 1 from the 9. 9 becomes 8 and 7 becomes 17. 17 minus 8 is 9. And then 9 becomes 8, so 8 minus 1 is 7. And there's your answer, £79,450 to pay. Read the notes, look at the notes I made underneath each of the calculations, the 4-step calculations, and you'll understand what I've done with each column. Now let's look at how to multiply and divide. You need to know when and how to multiply and divide because you will be required to do so in an exam, but even more importantly, in real life. Some calculations will involve multiplication. One number times another. You see the meaning of multiply now? Times. Multiplication is shown using the X sign. Well, yeah, in maths you use the time sign, especially if you're doing your calculation by hand. But in a computer, the multiplication sign is the star sign. But that is outside the realms of this lesson. But it's important to know things like that. Example, a theatre show costs £18 for a ticket. The theatre seats 2,100 people and it was full. If all the tickets are sold, that's what we mean, how much money will the theatre make? What will you do? You cannot add £18 2,100 times without a computer, without a calculator. So you have to use a shortened form of addition, and that is crucial. Multiplication is a shortened way of adding over and over and over again. And it's important that you know your multiplication table. Right, so 2,100 times 18 is equal to £37,800. You can check it with your calculator. Multiplying without calculator. So how do you do that a problem like that without a calculator? You have a 5-stage process. Write the numbers one above the other with the largest number on the top and line up the units columns. Multiply the units digit of the bottom number by each digit of the top number in turns, working from the right to the left, and write the answers underneath. Then multiply the tens digit of the bottom number by each digit of the top number. You need to add a 0 in the units column of the answer as you're multiplying by 10. Remember, if you get an answer of 10 or more, to carry the tens digit of the answer to the next column, to the left, like you do when you're adding. Add any carried number after doing the multiplication to the next column. And finally, add your answers together to get the final answer. Let's look at an example. Again, Please do not be put off when you see your screen full of text and numbers like this. Try to make sense out of it by reading carefully. And the first step is to read what the example says in text. Adam buys a new TV. He has to pay £106 a month for 18 months. How much will Adam pay in total for the TV? So obviously he has to multiply £106 by 18 because it's 18 equal payments. You have 3 steps. For each step you see all the notes that guides you and explains what you've done. Read them and you will understand what you're doing. Okay? So let's start. 6 times 8 is 48. You put your 8 down. And then naught times 8 is naught. Remember you carried 4 over from the units column. So you write your 4 down. And then 1 times 8 is 8. You did not carry anything. So that is pretty straightforward. So 106 times 8 is 848. But you're not finished yet because you have the 10 from the 18 to still multiply by. So the next column is what you're doing. Okay, so 106 times 1, which is actually 10, has got to be done. However, because you're multiplying by 10, you need to add 0 under the units column so you don't make any mistake or you don't put your answer on the wrong column, because that will automatically get your sum wrong. So you put your 0 under the units column and you say you multiply 106 by 1, which is 106. What we're saying is 106 times 10 is 1060. Look at the note. Once you've multiplied both digits by the sum you want to multiply, then you add your answers together. In this case, 804 plus 1060 is equal to 1908. So to write your answer down, you say Adam will pay £1,908 in total for the TV. We also need to know how to divide. Okay? And the notes you have to take into account are as follows. Some calculations will involve division, one number divided by another. Division is shown using a division sign, as you see there. You need to understand that. And one thing I would caution you about is division can be a little bit confusing. Not complex, but confusing. So you need to pay special attention to what you're doing and understand each step. Look at the example. A group is budgeting for a 5-day holiday. How much money does the group have per day if they have £1,360 for the 5 days holiday? That's what the holiday will cost for 5 days. So you want to know how much it will cost per day. So your answer, £1,360 needs to be divided by 5 days. So you need to calculate by dividing 1,360 by 5. And that is how you lay out your calculations without a calculator. Okay, you put your 5 outside the division line. You draw a bar at the top where you put your answers, and then you put the amount you want to divide inside that line, or inside that box, as I'll call it, or inside the division line. So the 5 is outside the division line and the amount you want to divide is inside the division line, and then you put your answer at the top. So 1 divided by 5 you cannot, so you need to do your division step by step, starting from the highest value, which is your 1000. Okay, so 1 divided by 5 you cannot, so you put a 0 And because it's not exactly 1,000, you need to do the adjustments right through. So that one is added to the 3. That one is actually 10. It's added to the 3 to make it 13. 13 divided by 5 is 2. And then you have a remainder 3. Because 5 times 2 is 10. And 13 minus 10 is 3. That 3 is added to is actually 30 and is added to the 6, which makes it 36. 36 divided by 5 is 7, but 7 times 5 is 35, and you have 36 there. So there's going to be a remainder 1, which you take to the tens column, and that 0 becomes 10. And 10 divided by 5 is 2. So your answer, the group has £272 per day to spend on the holiday. Now let's look at an example and look in details how we've divided. Okay? But first, let's look at this other example. This is how you write your division to make it clear. 672 divided by 4 would be written like, as I've said, you see your division line, which is a line on the left and a line that joins it horizontally. You put your divider, which is the 4, outside on the left, and then you put the amount you want to divide inside the divider, the division line, in other words. And then you do your division. You'll find out that 672 divided by 4 is 168. So step 2, divide each digit of the bigger number by the small number, working from left to right. Put the results for each division above the big number, lining up the digits. Step 3, if the number doesn't divide exactly, then the number left over the division is carried over to the next column. It's then used in the next digit's division. So if 1 was carried over and the next digit was a 6, then you have to divide 16. The amount left over after all the digits have been divided is called the remainder. Let's look at this example. Again, there's a lot to read, but don't be put off by that. Look at the example, which is the problem, and then look at how you lay out your work when you want to write your answer, and then you have the 4 steps starting from left to right, and there are notes underneath which explains what you do at each stage. In this case, once you've laid out your sum, you start dividing by 9. 1 divided by 9 you cannot, so you put a 0 and the 1 moves over to the 5, making it 15. 15 divided by 9 is 1, but the difference between 15 and 9 is 6. So the 6 goes over by the 7, and you divide 67 divided by 9, which is 7. 7 times 9 is 63, so you'll have a remainder 4. When you subtract that from 67, you add that 4 to the 0, or you move the 4 over to the 0 to make it 40. And then 40 divided by 9 is equal to 4. But remember, 9 times 4 is 36. So there is a difference of 4. But that's the number you want to divide. There is nothing else to divide, so that 4 becomes a remainder. And then you write your answer properly. Each charity will get £174, and there will be £4 left over. So Kofi will have to decide what to do with that £4. He can either save it for the next fundraising activity he's going to do, or he can decide to give that £4 to one of the charities, probably his favorite charity. Okay, so we've looked at adding, subtracting, multiplying and dividing without calculator. What next? Sometimes you have to write your answer in whole numbers if you're organizing something for a particular event that involves not leaving anything out. Let's look at these notes and example. As I said, you won't always end up with a whole number when you divide. And sometimes you'll need to give a whole number as your answer. For example, Richard needs 435 burgers for a summer event. Burgers come in packets of 12. How many packs will he need? Note that he must have 435 burgers. You can only buy in packs of 12. So, what is the calculation? You'll have to divide 435 by 12, which is equal to 36.25 if you're using a calculator, or 36 remainder 3. If you do the sum, you'll get your answer. But Richard has a problem. Richard can't buy 36.25 packs. The shops do not sell half packs. So your answer needs to be a whole number. 36.25 is between 36 and 37. If Richard buys 36 packs of burgers, he won't have enough for his event. So he has to buy 37 packs. That is why you have to give whole numbers. Finally, you need to be able to check that your calculations are correct. And you have a number of steps that you should follow. But the reason why it's important is simply because if you're doing an exam, you can get the method right, but if you don't have the answer correct, you will not get the full marks. And likewise, if you take your money to the shops to buy your stuff, if you cannot calculate properly or check the receipt that's been given you, you could well lose money if you meet a dishonest person to deal with. So either way, it's important. In the real world, when you have to go out to do your domestics or your job, or in an examination, you need to get it right. So there are 4 steps you need to follow. Once you've got your answer, you should check using the opposite calculations. In other words, adding and subtracting are opposite calculations. Multiplication and division are opposite operations. By doing the opposite calculation, you should get back to the number you started with. There are 2 examples here. Example 1, what is 300 minus 120? Your answer, 198. Check. Use the opposite calculation. In this case, you subtracted, so you have to add. Take the answer, 198, add 102, and your answer should be 300. If it's not, then it's wrong. Multiplying, example 2. What is 36 times 54? Your answer should be 1944. Check. Divide 1944 by 54, you should get 36. Or you can divide 1944 by 36, you will get 54. Now, I will expect you to make a mental note of what you've learned. And once you've done that, or you can write it down, then check it with the summary I've given you here on the screen. We know when to add or subtract. in a situation. We know how to add and subtract without using a calculator. We need to be able to do that. You need to know when to multiply in the real world. You need to know when and how to multiply large numbers, again without a calculator. You need to know when and how to divide without a calculator. You need to know how to check out that your answer is correct and what to do to check your answer. You do the opposite calculation. And then finally, we know now that in the real world, we should know what calculation to use in mathematics. Before we go, let's check how much we've learned by doing some self-assessment exercises. And you've got 4 things to take into account. Self-assessment exercises are designed for you to check how much you have learned. You need to answer all the questions in each set. Then check your answer with the answers provided. Attempt the questions first, check your answers afterwards. If you do it any other way, you're not helping yourself, and you will put yourself at risk of not getting maximum marks when you take your exam. Following these steps will help you assess your knowledge of what you've learned and to be able to identify areas you need to improve on. Remember, it's okay to get it wrong because we learn from it. And then finally, investigate wrong answers and make corrections. And these are your questions. Practice questions. Set 1, adding and subtracting. You've got 3 questions here. Read them carefully and answer them. Once you've done that, check your answers. If you got any wrong, find out where you got wrong and correct it. Practice question set 2, multiplying and dividing. Again, you've got 3 questions. Question 3 is A and B. Attempt them and then check your answers. And that's your answer for set 2 on multiplying and dividing. Practice questions set 3 is about checking your answers. So you see how important checking your answer is in maths. You got 3 questions. Attempt them, apply the principles of checking, and then check your answers, which is shown here. Okay? So that's your lesson on adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing without calculators. Do your set practice questions, apply proper self-assessment principles, and you can't go wrong. I'll see you next time.